Welcome to Noon Hour Slides from the Moose Jaw Museum and Art Gallery. We're located on Treaty 4 territory, the traditional lands of the Blackfoot, Cree, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We pay our respects to First Nations and Métis ancestors and reaffirm our relationship with one another. We gratefully acknowledge funding from the City of Moose Jaw, SaskArts, SaskCulture, Saskatchewan Lotteries, Canada Council for the Arts, Canadian Heritage, and the Government of Canada. I'm Vincent Hotelling, the Administrative Assistant here, and I'm here to welcome you to today's presentation. Anthony Kaduck has recently retired after a 35-year career in the Canadian Army. While he has long been interested in all aspects of the natural world, it was his exposure to a myriad of unfamiliar species while living in the UK that sparked a passion for birding which continues to carry him to the far-flung corners of Frontenac County and the world. Welcome.
Thanks, Vincent. Yeah, I'm glad to be here. And this is what I'm going to talk about, ornithological field work. And I should say up front, I'm a birder. I'm not an ornithologist, but I can do work when directed by scientists, so it's all good. Okay. And why is my slide not advancing? There we are. Okay, so that's me. And that is the bird, that's in what we call in birding terms a spark bird. That was the bird that really got me interested because I used to walk by these little creatures on my way to work, and they're just really cool little birds. And like, we don't have any wagtails in Canada, so I just got interested, had to find out what they were, had to get a pair of binoculars to see them better, and so it goes, and here we are. So where is Ascension Island? It's there. It is in the middle of nowhere. I mean, it's hard to be more remote than Ascension Island is, right out in the middle of the South Atlantic. It's basically a volcanic rock. So as it says there, about 88 square kilometers. It's mostly cinder cones. It has not much in the way of native vegetation and never actually had an indigenous population. Archaeology has determined that because it's in the middle of nowhere and has no food on it. So if you look at the map on the right, you'll just point out a couple of the key points. The town is Georgetown on the left. The other sort of settlement is Two Boats Village in the middle, and then there's the peak. And then the key point we'll talk about later on the right-hand side of that map is Bosun Islands. So Ascension, it's basically useful as a communications relay. And so there's a number of transatlantic cables that meet there. The British Broadcasting Corporation has their South Atlantic relay station there. There's a meter-class autonomous telescope that NASA uses to track orbital debris, because the skies are pretty clear here, by the way. There are the European Space Agency monitors their rocket flights from there. And there are also a number of very unusual looking antennas about which you are not allowed to ask questions that go into anonymous looking buildings and no doubt have a signals intelligence aspect to them. There are no permanent residents on Ascension. There's 806 people there at any given time. They all either work for the Royal Air Force, the United States Air Force, or the county administration, because you actually have no right to live there if you don't have a job. The nationality of these people, the British nationals, they belong to the British Overseas Territory of St. Helena, Ascension, and Tristan da Cunha. And so if you're born on the island and you reach the age of 18 and you don't manage to find a job on the island, then you're shipped off to Ascension, a place you've never been, because you don't have a right to be there. So interesting place. You can visit Ascension Island as a civilian. It's very expensive and time consuming and probably not worth it, but it's possible. We came in, of course, on an RAF flight because we were doing this as part of a military expedition. So the stars of the show today, we'll start off with the birds, and we'll start with the Ascension frigate bird. This is an endemic species to Ascension Island, meaning it's the only place in the world that this frigate bird breeds. If you've been to the Caribbean, you've probably seen magnificent frigate birds flying around. They're very similar, but there's some slight differences. And this red thing in the middle, it's gular sac. They inflate those to make themselves irresistible to females. Why he's doing that while he's flying along, I'm not sure. But so, and then sooty terns are a pretty widespread and common pelagic bird, mainly in the tropics and the southern hemisphere. No, what a pelagic bird is like a lot of seabirds, they only actually touch land when they're going to breed and lay an egg. The rest of the time they're out over the ocean, so for 9 months at a time. In the case of sooty terns, they're just out over the oceans. The brown noddy is one of the birds also that breeds on Ascension. The noddies are relatives of gulls, and there are both, and again, widespread in the tropics and the southern hemisphere. And their cousin, the black noddy, is even more widespread. Actually, there are populations of them around New Zealand and Australia and places like that. Both breed on the island. And then there are a number of booby species, starting off with the brown booby. And I apologize, that's not a great picture. It's a bit fuzzy, but brown boobies are pretty common. You can see them in the Caribbean. You can see them on the Pacific coast of California, for example. The odd one even wanders up as far as Nova Scotia. But it's probably the most common of the boobies. The masked booby is the largest. It's not as common, but it is quite an impressive bird. Again, you could see the places on the where its range is. That's one with its. Then there are red-footed boobies. They're not common on Ascension, but they do breed there in small numbers. And the interesting thing about that is to show you how long that particular nesting platform has been occupied by different birds. You have stalactites of bird guano forming on it. So that's probably several hundred years of that spot being used. And then the other main pelagic bird there is the white tern, or fairy tern, it's sometimes called, which isn't very tern-like. It's actually more like a noddy than a tern, but it's again, it has a wide distribution worldwide in the tropics, and they are seen sort of in southern states occasionally, Mexico, but they breed on offshore islands like this one. Sorry, not the last. We have also two species of tropic bird that breed there, which are quite attractive beasts. This is a red-billed tropic bird and the white-tailed tropic bird. And then we'll get to land birds in a moment. There are a number of species were introduced to Ascension over the years, and these are the only ones that have actually stuck and made a go of it. The black francolin is a grouse type of species, and they're actually pretty scarce. Which may have something to do with the fact that they're good eating. Common mynas, originally from the Indian subcontinent, they're there in large numbers and a bit of a pest, as we'll talk about in a moment. And then common waxbill is just a small finch type species. And we have one species of canary there that's fairly common. So the natural history of the island, before people started to actually stay there permanently, there were about 20 million seabirds that bred on the island. But as boats started to stop there, and they were primarily stopping to capture green sea turtles for food. So when a ship comes ashore, rats escape from it, and the rats pretty quickly, rat population boomed because frankly, seabird chicks are pretty good eating. They're defenseless, and the parents will try to defend them, but the sooty terns in particular are not very fierce. And so the rat populations exploded. So in 1815, when the British garrison was established and it was sort of overrun by rats, they decided to bring in cats. And this is a little like the little old lady who swallowed a fly, because what did the cats do? Well, if you're a cat, you could fight with rats who are fairly fierce and aggressive, or you could go help, assist the rats in eating the seabirds' eggs and chicks. So the net result of this is by 1836, the Ascension frigate bird was extirpated from the mainland, which means it doesn't exist on the mainland anymore. And that's an Ascension frigate bird sitting on the rocks there in the background. So where would they go? They went to this place called Bosun Island, and it's a sea stack. It's just off the shore, but it's not within rat swimming distance. And so up on the flat top of here, for about 200 years, the entire world's population of Ascension frigate birds bred. So it's a dodgy situation because one wrong thing goes and you could lose that species, like if rats got onto that. So we'll get to how happened about that later. In 1836, the Darwin and the Beagle visited Ascension. And after that, in speaking with his colleague, Joseph Hooker, about the potential of the island, Hooker was a botanist and an explorer, and he was seized with the idea that if you could import trees, you could form a cloud forest there, which would then increase the amount of water on the island and lead to turning it into a green paradise. That was the idea. So they started to import different species of trees, and some of them eventually managed to stick. And this is why they call it Green Mountain. This is actually the top of it, and there is a forest-like thing that actually they gather a lot of water from. There's runoff from this is collected in a cistern and used for water, because water is hard to come by on the island. So it is, when you look at it, it looks like a tropical rainforest. It's quite cool and has all these different tree species and mosses and stuff like that. But the interesting thing is, it's not a rainforest. It's actually kind of a dead-end ecosystem, because a rainforest ecosystem involves the trees and the plants, but it also involves insect populations, fungi in the soil, small mammals, lizards, all of that sort of stuff. And they didn't import any of that stuff, and there was none there originally. So it's it's a very weird and silent place. It's really more like a garden in a botanical garden than it is like a real forest, but it's cool enough. There are some insects there, but as far as I know, as far as I'm able to find out, there are no breeding populations of butterflies. There's the odd butterfly like this that gets blown in from Africa and sets up shop, but there really isn't much. So it's just kind of an interesting, almost like a dead end ecosystem. But going on, so the big news is in World War II, it was decided that the Allies decided to build an airstrip on Ascension, and they built Wide Awake Airfield. The idea was they wanted to extend anti-submarine patrols into the South Atlantic, and this is a good place to do it from, and also as a stopping point for aircraft that were flying to resupply missions in Africa. So, of course, they found a nice flat spot, which was the nice flat spot that the seabirds used to breed in, and they drove this airfield right through the main seabird fair, and probably, at a guess, lost half of the population of those birds. But it is what it is. There was a war on, and nobody really cared much about ecology at the time. So flash forward to 1966. Now, I point out 1966, we ought to have figured out about introducing species in their non-native environment, because by now parts of Australia are already overrun by cane toads. Population of rabbits has exploded in Australia and New Zealand. In 1964, the first starlings hit the west coast of North America, having been introduced in Central Park in 1898. Or sorry, 1898, yes. So, but nonetheless, we're engineers, we have a problem. We're setting up this relay station, and the soil isn't really solid enough. So we're going to bring in a plant that has a good root structure that will stabilize the soil. So we'll bring in the species of mesquite, prickly mesquite. And now it overruns a large part of the island because there's nothing there that eats it, nothing to stop it growing, and basically it can't be gotten rid of because these things have tap roots that go down 30 feet. So you can kill the top stuff all you want and it just grows back. And why is that a bad thing? Well, aside from the fact that people doing surveys have to fight their way through this in masses of very prickly stuff, it provides cover for rats and provided cover for feral cats to hide in when they were being hunted. So just generally not a great idea. So now 50 years after having built this airstrip, it emerged in the consciousness of the British military that something really ought to be done to monitor the remaining seabird populations. So this was passed around from headquarters to headquarters, and eventually it ended up in the hands of the ornithological societies. Now, Britain is a bird-mad country. If I told you that the RSPB, the Royal Society for Protection of Birds, was the largest NGO in Britain with 1.4 million active members, then that would tell you this is pretty keen on birding. So, and that feeds into the military as well. So the three main branches of the service each have there's the Army Ornithological Society, the Royal Air Force Ornithological Society, and the Royal Navy Birdwatching Society. Because of course you can't mix the services. That would be just wrong, I guess. Anyway, these are big organizations. There's 400 members in the Army Ornithological Society, and I can contrast that with the fact that in 35 years in the Canadian Army, I met one other person who would admit to being a birder. So different thing. But these societies are serving and retired members of that service, and they do field trips like this one to Morocco I was on, and they do conservation work. So eventually the conservation of these seabirds fell in the hands of the Army and Royal, well, actually all three ornithological societies. So once these seabirds were being monitored, then it sort of, it was obvious that the population of feral cats, wild cats on the island, was continuing to do serious damage. So the Royal Society for Protection of Birds took the lead in 2002 to start eradicating these feral cats. And that program ran over 4 years and it was successful. There are no wild cats on the island, and actually very few cats at all. And the good news is that in 2012, the first evidence was found that the Ascension frigate bird was back breeding on the mainland. And that's really important because their population can expand. There was a limit to the number of nests they could put on Bosun Island, but now they have the whole island. So the population of that bird is expanding, and that's good news. And it was an expedition from the, let's blow our horn a bit, was an expedition from the Army Ornithological Society that actually found the first frigate bird nest on the mainland. So yay us. And there is a frigate bird chick on the mainland taken when I was there in 2015. So the mission that I was on, and it's the same basically mission set for each time this is done. And it's done on a 9-month cycle because that's the sooty tern breeding cycles every 9 months. So our job was to survey the size and density of the tern fairs, which is, a fair is what they call the area where the birds nest, and also survey in previously abandoned areas to see if they come back. And we were looking mainly at sooty terns and brown noddies. We also had planned to ring 2,000 adults and Polaris, or juvenile birds. Ring, by the way, in North America we call it banding. That's putting a band on a bird's leg with numbers on it so it can be tracked. In Europe, it's called ringing. We also, and this is a fairly new thing, we're going to install 50 geolocator tags. I'll talk about them in a bit. And also retrap previously ringed and tagged birds, and do some surveys of the breeding colonies across the land, do a land bird survey, and to do the usual rat and mouse survey, just to establish the population trend line, whether it's growing or reducing, and to trap up as many rats as we could. And we're also training new ringers from the island staff and renewing their permits so that they can do this on an ongoing basis. So how do you survey a tern fair that's got between 400,000 and 500,000 terns on it, and they're flying around and don't actually like you being there? What you do is you send a team to establish the outer limits of it. So they basically walk around with the GPS and they establish points so you have the size of the tern fair. And then you pick some random areas inside that are 10-meter circles, and you count the number of occupied nests. And then basically you multiply that number by the size of the thing to give you a rough estimate of how many birds are there. And as I say, it's roughly 400,000, 500,000 birds at a given time on the wide-awake tern fair, which is the one, you can see the map on the lower left, and marked in red just below the airstrip is this place where this picture is taken, the wide-awake tern fair. And by the way, I should say, when all of this is going on, there are daytime highs here are usually about plus 35. There's no shade, and the rocks or volcanics are extremely rough. So it's a bit of a slog, but this I thought is really nice. This will give you a bit of the experience of what it's like being on these tern fairs. This is actually video from Wide Awake Tern Fair. Yeah. I've turned the sound down on this quite a bit. It's actually quite deafening being on the tern fair, but it's just kind of, it was a really cool experience if you're into birds. So this is you know, as I mentioned, one of the tasks was to do some ringing of birds, and so it's basically you use something akin to a giant butterfly net to catch the bird, and then you carefully handle it and put the ring on it and let it go. And you can see there, when I say they're not very fierce, this sooty tern that I have in my hands on the right is trying to bite me, but they don't bite very well and they don't peck very hard. In fact, it's funny. We normally wear a hat on this because they'll land on top of your head and peck at your head, but it's not very successful. The bird on the left, on the other hand, is a mass booby, and they are notorious biters, and they have razor sharp bills. And if they get a hold of your finger, they will bite it right down to the bone, as we saw demonstrated during this mission. So not without its hazard. But the point of ringing birds is that when they're found or retrapped or found dead somewhere, you can actually look at the ring, and there's various places you can go to determine where that bird was ringed. And so it helps establish the range of the bird. One of the questions with the sooty terns is, do they always breed on Ascension, this population, or do they go to different islands? And what we've found so far is actually the birds that breed on Ascension always go to Ascension, and they always go to the places where their siblings are. So somehow they know that this is the family plot or something. So they're sort of tied to a particular spot on the fair, which is kind of interesting. So there's a sooty tern, and there's its little chicks just coming out of the nest. And you can see they'd be pretty easy work for a rat or a cat to deal with. Now, we were working with a biologist from the University of Birmingham, and I'm going to just give you his name. I have a good memory, but it's short. Yeah, Jim Reynolds. So he had the idea that we could put geolocator tags on these birds. Now, the thing about sooty terns is they're too small to put an RFID tag, the kind that you can actually interrogate from the ground, because it's a fairly small bird. But you can put one of these little geolocator tags on it. And what they do is over time, they measure the length of the day and the time of sunrise. And from that information, they can actually extrapolate and give you an approximate idea of where the bird was over time. And this is important because if we know where the sooty terns typically feed out in the ocean, then you can take conservation measures to make sure that their food supply isn't impacted. So it's all good. You put this tag on, and then when you get the tag back, you can, extract that information from it. But the tricky bit is getting the tag back. So of the 400,000 birds on this tern fair, there were about 60 flying around that had these tags, and we had to try and find them and capture them so we could recover the tags. And we did get actually 12, which is a pretty good number, and we installed, I think, 50 more. So all good stuff. Then we also did some surveys of all the other breeding birds, and most of them breed on cliffs, and it's relatively easy if tedious. You bounce around in a rubber boat and you count occupied nests. And that's a black noddy on the right, just looking annoyed at us. And we surveyed white terns as well. Now, a lot of them breed on the cliffs, but a lot of them breed inland, including in the forest. And they have a very strange habit. They lay a single egg, like most seabirds, and they just lay it right on a bough of a tree. There's no nest or anything like that. And as long as it stays on the bough of the tree, then the chick is hatched and they raise it. It seems like a pretty high risk proposition, but because they continue to do it, it must be working. And then, of course, the infamous land bird survey. So we had to basically walk, they're called transects, lines across the entire island to count the number of land birds. And being one of the younger members and more robust members of the expedition, allegedly, I got to take part in the land bird survey. So it was a lot of marching across bare open ground like this, and a lot of fighting our way through mesquite bush to count the land birds, of which there aren't really that many, but it's worthwhile to establish a population trend. And there's a little artistic photograph from the land bird survey. And then, of course, as always in these expeditions, we did surveys on rat and mouse populations to determine whether, what the trend line is, up or down, and also killed as many rats as we could. We're not that successful because for some reason this time around the mice kept getting into the rat traps and tripping them. So But, it's all good. And then, of course, the evenings are long in the tropics and it's dark and there's not much to do. So we found ways to amuse ourselves in the evening. Now, it's not all birds. Ascension is home to a large and healthy population of green sea turtles. These used to be hunted for food up till about 1936. But since then, they've been protected. The population's actually grown, and there's actually quite a large number of these turtles. And of course, Ascension is miles and miles of this deep sand beach that's ideal for them to lay their eggs in. So we saw lots of turtles coming up that we just happened to be there during their nesting season. So lots of turtles coming up and lots of little baby turtles heading for the water. Now, one of the things that we don't understand about Ascension terns is that they like to pick up these baby turtles and fly around with them. And it's not clear why, because they can't actually swallow them and they can't get at the meat inside. So, but they do this, they fly around with them and throw them up in the air and stuff. Don't really know if they were juveniles practicing their hunting skills, maybe, but this is a fully adult bird flying around. So just one of those mysteries. We don't know why they do that. We were also there, as it happens, during the land crab breeding season. And this is a particular species of land crab called Johngarthia lagostoma. It's found on several islands in the South Atlantic. And they live in burrows on the ground. They come out at night and they eat plant matter and any dead thing they come across. And it's a good sized crab. The main body is about the size of your hand. So, and they're kind of purple and orange. But once a year they breed. And to do that, they go down to the ocean. And what happens is the female shakes her eggs out and a male stands by to fertilize them. And then they actually start off living in the ocean before they come ashore. So, of course, we were there, had to have a look at this, and the scientists were down there, measuring and counting and doing good scientific things. So what is the result of all of this research? Well, so far, we've established that clearly the eradication of cats was the thing that allowed the Ascension frigate bird to return to the mainland to breed, and that's a good thing. And it's also resulted in a modest but a sustained and sustaining increase in the sooty tern population. We found that after the cats were eradicated, the rat population briefly expanded, actually zoomed quite a bit, but then it's now stabilized at a level that it's not actually damaging the seabirds that much. The common mynas we talked about earlier predate the eggs. They come and poke holes in them to drink the yolk, but and it's a fairly low rate. Again, it's sustainable. It seems that the sooty terns, at least the year I was there, were onto some good food populations. Because when you pick up a sooty tern, its response is to regurgitate its food on you to make you go away. When they're eating squid, it's really nasty because it's basically this horrible smelling black ink that stains your clothes forever. But the year I was there, they were mostly regurgitating good quality fish. So maybe that says that there was just, maybe transitory, or maybe that there's just, a better supply of fish available in their area. Brown noddy population is increasing. And I say awaiting publication, I believe the geolocator study has now been published. I just haven't got access to the research paper. So, this is the one time I've really done serious ornithological work, albeit as a dog's body and helper. And well, my takeaways from that are, first of all, it's not a holiday. The work was challenging, both from the environment, the nature of the land, and the need to exercise extreme care, because you're out there trying to do your stuff on a tern fair, and tern eggs are very fragile. And if you sort of move your foot the wrong way and hit one of these eggs, it'll probably crack. And then that's 9 months worth of work for that pair down the drain. So they only lay one egg and they only lay one every 9 months. So you really have to be exercising care at the same time you're baking and trying to do your job. So it's hard work, and it causes me to respect, field biologists across the world, because most of what we know about animals comes from hours and hours and hours of hard, tedious work doing this sort of counting and research that leads us to understand, bird and the other birds and frogs and turtles and every other population we study. The military birding societies play a key role in this. First of all, because we're able to get onto the island, which is key, but there are a few naturalists on the island, but when you bring in 10 people and they basically work all day, every day for 2 weeks, you can get during the time when the terns are there, you can get a lot of work done, and that's important to them. And I think you can fairly say about military birders that we're sort of habituated to substandard accommodation, substandard food, long working hours in the field, and traveling over rough terrain. So this was actually something we're used to doing. And in fact, for those of us who are retired, it was kind of like a bit of reliving our soldier days. So it's all good. And the one thing I notice about everybody who does this is they just have an emotional attachment to these sooty terns, as I do, because when you hold one of these little creatures in your hands, and you know this little bird spends almost its entire life out in the middle of the South Atlantic, and then it comes back to this inhospitable place to lay its egg. It's really quite something. And of course, all work and no play make Jack a dull boy. So that's briefly the story of that expedition to Ascension in 2015. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Where do you plan on going in the future? Are there other projects you're doing?
There aren't actual projects I'm doing. It's in my sort of thing, or my plan over the next few years, to start the process of learning to ring birds or band birds. And it's sort of a 3 or 4 year process you have to go through to actually get licensed to do it. And then there's additional levels of license up to the highest level, which is ringing hummingbirds, which is amazingly tricky. But I always have plans to go different places to look for birds. So with luck, inshallah, I'm off to Ecuador in less than 2 weeks. So, and that's just to see birds. So.
Hope we see you again, maybe next year.
Sure. Well, next year I'll be able to talk about, next year, again with luck, knock on wood, I'll be able to talk about the Falkland Islands and Antarctica, because that's on the schedule. Again, COVID willing and everything else. So like 12 species of penguins. It should be good.
I do have one question, and that is, all of the pictures that I saw were people wearing shorts, and you're supposed to be walking through this prickly stuff.
Yeah. This wearing of shorts is a British thing I don't quite get. They'll wear shorts at any opportunity. They'll run in shorts when it's, Arctic there, like -5 and snowy. If it's slashing down rain and cold, they run in shorts. You didn't see me wearing shorts, let me tell you. In the prickle bushes, it doesn't seem like a really great idea. And, getting massive amounts of UV on your legs doesn't seem like a good idea either, but it is a British thing. See the question there, do we ever try poisoning rats? No, and I'm not sure why that's not, but I suspect it may have something to do with the fact that they'd be concerned that the little tern chicks would go and find rat food and eat it. But I don't actually know. I know they stick to traps. I think one of the advantages of traps is that you can actually confirm that you've killed a rat instead of just putting some poison out and not really being able to measure the effect of it. But it's a good question. I will actually talk to some of my colleagues and see if that's been tried.
Where are you going in Ecuador? Is on the coast or the mountains?
We're actually going in the southwest corner of Ecuador. There's a habitat which they call tumbes, which is a sort of dry forest area. It's forested during the rainy season, and then the trees actually lose their leaves, and so there's a lot of species that are endemic to that particular habitat. So it's my first time to Ecuador, and you have to do it in pieces if you really want to sort of get the full birding of the country. And there's a lot of birds in Ecuador in a small country. It's probably, I'd say, the #2 destination after Colombia. And I was supposed to be in Colombia in January for the 5th time, but that didn't happen because of COVID. So next year.
Yeah,
Colombia
well,
is
great if you give us a show on it next year. That'd be fun to see.
Yeah, I have to say, I mean, this is my pitch. If you're really interested in birds and you want to see birds of the tropics, Colombia is the place to be. It has 20% of the world's bird species are in Colombia. And there's 6 different regions, each of which has its own particular birds. And you know, there's 160 species of hummingbird in Colombia, I think. I mean, it's an epic place. And it's beautiful, and the food is great, and the people are lovely. And, I have friends that contact me. My British Army friends are always on, because they run an expedition every year, and they're always saying, well, why don't you come to Sri Lanka with us, or why don't you come to Kazakhstan with us? And I'm like, well, I don't know, like half the world's birds are in North, Central, and South America. So they're a maximum of 3 time zones away. It's a 5-hour flight to Bogota. It's probably over 24 hours to get to Sri Lanka, and you totally says, well, why would I go anywhere else till I've seen all the birds? Which I won't, by the way, because there isn't enough time left. But it's a goal. I have to say, I was in Saskatchewan recently for the first time. Well, for the first time birding, and you have some pretty great birds there. So that requires more work. But we did get whooping cranes, and that was pretty epic. So I've been interested in birds when I was living in Moose Jaw. I would have seen a lot more than I did, but there it is. I'm a late onset birder.
There are some around. I see them out my window. But
Yeah, that's a really great birds, actually.
there's a little island in the park, and you could see it. And there was a kingfisher that comes sometimes that I like to watch.
But it's the quantity too. We were out at the last mountain lake in October, and there were the sandhill cranes were coming in by the thousand. You know, just waves and waves and waves of these birds coming in, and there's pretty spectacular birds, and just to see the sheer number is a birding experience on its own. So it's pretty cool.
Well, thanks for coming.
Okay. It's my pleasure.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Good opportunity to find out what's going on. And
yeah, I just thought it'd be interesting because, Ascension is a place that people don't get to. It frankly wouldn't be worth your money to get there. It was, the flight was £2,000 when it was available. And right now it's not, because the airstrip needs some work. So the RAF can't land their big sort of combination tanker passenger aircraft there. They have to fly through South America. So, but even when it was £2,000 and then it's space available, so you'd be sitting there in Bryce Norton with your ticket, and then they say, oh, flight's not going today, or you've been bumped by a service person, and then you just have to cool your heels until you get so. And there's only one place to stay, and it's really just not a practical place to visit unless you came on your yacht. So ocean-going yacht is the desirable option.
I'll have to go dig mine out of the storage.
Yeah.
And
I think Paul Allen was selling his small yacht. We actually saw it in Venice. His small yacht being bigger than a Royal Canadian Navy frigate with 2 helicopter pads, but it was a small rubbish yacht that he was getting rid of because he has a bigger one. So that one's probably still available.